Remember when artists were complaining that UMG and other labels were putting pressure on them to be on TikTok and make viral content?
I don't see any artists that are like, yeah, take my shit off of TikTok. They weren't seeing that money anyway. There's no other side to this for the artist. Like it's just bad.
What's going down is At Odds podcast, and there's a lot to be at odds about this week. The TikTok situation, Ice Spice and her producer and labels getting sued. So we appreciate you tuning in to our podcast. It is brought to you by Too Lost. So regardless of what's going on with TikTok, you still want to have your music in places. And the fact of the matter is, as an unsigned artist, you can put your music wherever you want. So try out Too Lost, www.toolost.com. Use the code at odds for 3 whole free months of premium music distribution. And if you decide to continue using it, it's only $2.99 for additional months. Or if you decide not to, your music does not get deleted. It stays up on the platforms. Are there any contest updates, Dame?
No, other than, I guess by the time this comes out, that will be the final day you have to get your entry in for the Collab for the Crown contest for your shot at $20,000. But to follow up on what you were just talking about, I think some people don't even know like how to get their music on Instagram and like Facebook, because some distributors miss that. There's some artists that I work out and I try to add music to some of my workout videos, and I have to hit up artists all the time and say, yo, your music's not available in the Instagram library, and just let them know that, you know, you need to reach out to your distributor. Maybe they missed it, or maybe they don't have the capability to do it. But with Too Lost, we definitely get your music on all platforms. Matter of fact, we distribute to more stores than any other distributor out there. We distribute to over 450 stores. So yeah, if you're missing that opportunity, you know, I've had to hit up several artists just in the past month, again, because I add their music to workout videos that I post on my Instagram story, and it just hasn't been available. But I think we should jump into the UMG versus TikTok battle, because it's getting spicy. But you want to give a rundown, Payne, on exactly what's going on?
Speaking of spicy, turn your mic down a little more, the gain a little more. It's sounding a little hot. We want to get it down to jalapeno. It's at Scotch bonnet right now. From what I understand, I didn't even know there was a negotiations process happening. As we've covered before, all of these platforms that use music, specifically the master recordings of music from various catalogs, have these blanket licensing agreements with the major labels to use their catalogs. We don't know what the terms are. The artists are always cut out of that process of negotiating. But it seems as though TikTok and Universal Music Group have failed to come to a consensus as far as their most recent contract negotiation goes. UMG threatened to pull its catalog from TikTok. And I'm thinking, there's no way that's going to happen. TikTok is way too influential. And then next thing you know, they did it. And there are artists that I know who either are or were signed to UMG. Kia Shine, for example, was posting screenshots that showed none of his back catalog from when he was with Universal is available on TikTok anymore. It wasn't a choice he made. It was a choice the label made because they own the masters. But there's been a lot of fallout. Brandman Sean and No Labels Necessary have really been on this particular topic. And mixed reactions from people. Some people are upset. Some people think this is a great opportunity.
Let me just read the response from TikTok, because I thought it was a spicier response than I thought they were going to issue. But they said, "It is sad and disappointing that Universal Music Group has put their own greed above the interest of their artists and songwriters. Despite Universal's false narrative and rhetoric, the fact is they have chosen to walk away from the powerful support of a platform with well over 1 billion users that serves as a free promotional and discovery vehicle for their talent. TikTok has been able to reach artist-first agreements with every other label and publisher. Clearly, Universal's self-serving actions are not in the best interest of artists, songwriters, and fans." I think this is super interesting because, like, this is probably the first time a major label has not been able to just throw their weight around and get their way. TikTok is a monster. TikTok is a huge platform with a lot of power. So I just think it's funny and interesting, just kind of with my popcorn on the sideline, just to see, a major label not be able to get its way. And ultimately, who I think this is going to hurt the most is the smaller artists on the UMG roster, because they're more dependent on TikTok to get the promotion on the platform, because they don't have the big budgets like the stars on UMG roster that can promote their music in other ways. That's who I think it's going to hurt the most. I think ultimately they'll come to an agreement. Universal is going to realize, like, hey, we don't have the leverage, and they kind of need TikTok because there's not really a comparable right now. Like, Instagram is still relevant, but in terms of music, I think TikTok has more influence, and leads to more streams of the music. So I think ultimately, UMG is going to have to cave a bit. But, I definitely got my popcorn on the sidelines. And, for other artists, I think it's kind of a good thing. It's less competition on the platform. At the end of the day, I don't think that the creators on TikTok care where music comes from. If it's good, they want to use it. So, ultimately, I think Universal Music Group is going to have to, cave a little bit if they want, access to TikTok. That's my opinion, but it's interesting. What do you think, Erinn?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating just display. Like you said, UMG not being able to throw their weight around. I'm assuming they have been in the past, but again, it's like TikTok has a proven value here. And I was surprised. I don't know. I think it's like that echo chamber when you're the biggest and the best by default, so to speak. You assume that everybody's gonna fold. But I'm like, does UMG understand how TikTok works? Like, literally creators aren't like, oh dang, I can't use a Taylor Swift song. They're finding the most random mixes, the most random songs. It just so happens to be those songs are also there, or like, hey, I'm a Taylor Swift fan, so I'm going to make this content. But it's not going to stop them, especially people who are incentivized to grow their audience on that platform by a favorable algorithm. So I don't, yeah, it's a super interesting case study, especially because UMG was really trying to be rude, and they're like, oh, this is less than, what did they say, like less than 1.5% of our revenue. And I'm like, yeah, but y'all aren't mentioning how much y'all are saving in marketing dollars, because it's a huge, huge, huge play for them to get free marketing from the amount of creators on the platform. And then when a song takes off, everybody wants to use it because they want to be a part of the viral trend. UMG, if you want to hold out, let's see what happens in 6 months. I want to see how much of a hit you take. UMG to me has the most to lose from this situation. So it's so surprising that they're coming with the type of energy that they're coming with. I also feel like, yeah, I'm just excited to see what trends come about. But even back catalog stuff, I think about Keisha Cole's Love that took off like incredibly last year and has been charting this year. That song came out, if I'm not mistaken, when I was in middle school, maybe high school, but it's over, what is it, 20 years old at this point, and
Yeah.
it's charting, if I'm not mistaken, higher than it was charting when it was originally out. I think about all the legacy artists, like Bonnie Raitt has charted. There's just so many. I don't know who they're signed. I don't know. I'm not saying that these are UMG artists. I'm just thinking about songs that I've loved that have come back around because of TikTok. So it's not even just new creators. It's people whose catalogs have been sitting on UMG's roster who are now experiencing retroactive success from songs that they released over decades and decades ago, and the benefit that is to UMG as far as zero promotion, back catalog bumps, chart placements, all those things. So I think I think they're aware of the ramifications, but it seems like a pissing contest with the people at the top. Something that Brandman Sean had said is there's no way that the trickle down effect. There's way too many people who would have known that UMG was pulling from TikTok, it would have leaked. So the fact that it happened, and there's executives who are like, yo, wait, what? So, like marketing departments are going to be rethinking. And then another thing is, TikTok gives a ton of ad credits, even just to independent labels. Like you can run music for free, like the indie label that I just stopped working with, they would give their creators like 10K every couple of months in TikTok ad credits. So it's like, I think about all the ad credits UMG was probably also like millions upon millions of dollars. And so now
Yeah.
marketing departments are going to have to rethink even buying influencers. It's not just TikTok revenue. You're spending money on influencers. So I don't know. I think this is fascinating. I'm really excited that somebody stood up to UMG. I want to see how this goes. I'm not choosing a side because I'm not saying that TikTok is the best platform or the most favorable to artists, because I do think fighting to be favorable to artists does matter. But for UMG to have the audacity to say that they want that it's not favorable to artists, I'm like, that is the biggest of all pots calling the smallest kettle black. Like, let's be freaking for real, UMG. Y'all have never been favorable to the artists. So I don't know. I think
Yeah.
it's super fascinating.
They're kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouths, because UMG made the statement that on the one hand, and I'll just quote it directly, TikTok proposed paying our artists and songwriters at a rate that is a fraction of the rate that similarly situated major social platforms pay. And then they also said TikTok accounts for only about 1% of our total revenue. You already signed that agreement on the one hand, and on the other hand, you're saying this is not favorable. On the one hand, you say it doesn't pay us a damn thing. It's so insignificant. On the other hand, you're saying, no, this is a serious issue. On the one hand, you're saying we don't need you. On the other hand, we're saying you're not fair to us. So which one is it? There are some conspiracy theories, I'm not using that term as a pejorative. I think they're compelling theories. I won't get into all of them. One of them has to do with TikTok launching their merch store and starting to break away from also launching, I think, a distribution platform as well. Just something that competes with UMG. Could that be a reason? Is that pushing UMG over the edge? I don't know. We also know that there has been a pretty strong political lobby in the United States against TikTok, and then some of the content as of late that has criticized U.S. foreign policy quite a bit might also not align with the politics of UMG's ownership. So there's a lot going on that might be happening in the background here with regards to what's going on. Because on the surface, UMG is trying to frame this as a fight for their artists, but we know how their percentages break down.
Yeah, it's definitely not a fight for the artists. I mean, very few artists on their roster are going to see more of that revenue in their deal, right? Like they're probably getting, even if it's 1% of that 1%, the artists are probably getting on average maybe 15% of that. So that's a pretty laughable argument for sure. But I definitely think it'll be interesting. There's smart people at these labels, right? Like there are some smart people. So they have to be running the numbers on not just on the 1% of direct revenue, but like how much the promotion leads to streams on Spotify and Apple Music and what that number is, right? Because that number's substantially more, I'm assuming. So I anticipate this getting sorted out.
I mean, the rodeo record, that's under the UMG umbrella, I believe, and that was purchased by UMG. That artist was signed because of TikTok. The song went viral on TikTok. This has happened so many times to so many artists, and I'm guessing, I would bet money that the majority of the artists that ended up signed off of TikTok fall under the UMG umbrella.
Yeah, that was going to be something that I was going to say as well, is it's funny too, because when people talk about TikTok artists, or you can't just rely on TikTok, that's something to me that's somewhat of an indirect shot at UMG, because that's even like how they're A&Ring at this point. They're looking at TikTok trends, songs that are taking off, and they're just that's why they're doing these one-off single deals and whatnot, or they're doing remixes based off of a song that took off on TikTok. So specifically, the audacity is laughable at this point to me, because it's like y'all are saving money in y'all's A&R department. Y'all are saving money in your research and development department. Y'all are even saving money from signing artists who literally only have a TikTok hit. And that's no disrespect to those artists, but it's like you have all the leverage now when you're coming to the table versus signing an artist that has traction in their city or in a regional or nationwide sense. So I don't know. It's so interesting. It's kind of like when you tell the popular kid you're uninterested in being a part of their bullshit, and they're like, wait, you don't want me? You don't need me? It's like, nobody's checking for you, bro. Like, this ecosystem functions outside of you. You know what I'm saying? I've experienced several of those situations in the music industry where somebody was trying to give me a shitty deal or a shitty situation, and then they were surprised when I backed off because of their name. So I think this may be that, or it could be, it could be a strongman thing. I think there's so much that happens behind the scenes. It's not all dollars and cents, as you were speaking to, Payne. There's a lot of other things that could be a factor in this, but it's funny that they're trying to make their stance about equitability. And that to me is just the funniest part. I'm like, y'all could have at least been honest. Like, we would have been okay with that. You know what I'm saying? With the TikTok thing, with Spotify and their rates, I felt like UMG was a little bit more honest. Like, it is what it is. Even with the AI stuff, they were disingenuous and they were like, we don't like this AI stuff. And then suddenly they were like, UMG now has a new blanket licensing agreement for AI audio or AI stuff. You know what I'm saying? At least there it's like, y'all are shitheads anyways. But now I'm like, come on, this can't be your stance. Y'all are not trying to take care of people. Y'all are the big company. Y'all are the tyrant. Y'all are the man. Just double down and stand in your manness. Like, none of us like you anyways. Don't try to pretend that you're on our side right now. And respect to like employees of UMG. This is not directed specifically. It's just at the institution of what UMG as a conglomerate represents is more about business than it is about art and taking care of humans. So
do you think that if the artists start complaining, UMG will care? Like, if there's like, hey, we want our music back on TikTok, do you think that eventually they'll kind of add that as a factor of why they sit back down at the table?
No, and I'll tell you why. We did a whole episode on this, but it was the opposite. Remember when artists were complaining that UMG and other labels were putting pressure on them to be on TikTok and make viral content as leverage against them? So Halsey was a big one we discussed. Halsey was complaining that her label, which was Capitol, which is, lo and behold, Universal Music Group. She's not on UMG anymore. She's now with Sony, I believe. But at the time, she was posting on social media that she had new music that the label was refusing to release for her until she went on TikTok and made content. And her whole thing was, I don't want to make content. And then ironically, she made content about not wanting to make content, and it went viral. So that's a 180.
But that's one person. I'm saying in mass, like if a lot of artists were like, yo, like, what's going on? Because in a sense, like, TikTok is kind of like DatPiff, right? In terms of the promotional capabilities. It wasn't really about like getting paid from DatPiff. It was just the opportunity for exposure on the platform and the promotional value of it. I'd have to think at some point, if enough artists were like, yo, we need our music back on TikTok, I'm not saying that'd be the sole reason why they'd sit back down at the table, but they'd have to factor that in.
What do you think if enough artists say, we want a better licensing agreement with Spotify that UMG would do that. I think you're right. It's more likely that they're going to sit back down with TikTok and come to an agreement. But I think we're overestimating the artist's influence, because artists complain all the time and the labels spit in their faces. Consumers, though, if consumer behavior changed, which it won't, I sound like a cynic, but artists have been complaining about Spotify rates forever and it hasn't changed consumer behavior. If consumer behavior suddenly changed, that's where the power lies. Because UMG already owns the artist catalogs.
Right. But I would have, again, I don't think it would be the sole reason, but I think it'd be if they were, especially if the top artists started saying something, at some point they would have to listen to that. The problem is artists can never really collectively do anything. There's always going to be a huge percentage but I think in this case, I think most artists will be on board and kind of have a similar view of TikTok, because they're not just dependent on, it's not just the streaming income. Like, having their music on the platform helps the entire business, right? It helps the touring side, helps the merch side. So I do think if a decent amount of artists start complaining, going to social media saying, hey, this is ridiculous, I do think that's something that UMG has to listen to.
I think they wouldn't, though, because it's a slippery slope. I think that if there's a collective bargaining power and artists are like, yo, you got to get our music back up, and UMG does it, immediately the switch is almost like a union. They're like, okay, well, we want better royalty, like Payne said, better royalty rates on Spotify. We want better. I feel like it could lead, or could potentially lead, to more demands from a public platform that rally a group of artists. And I don't think that UMG wants like a melee. So they're gonna avoid, I feel like, that type of pressure. Even if it is from the artist, they're gonna be like, we've been negotiating with TikTok. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they're gonna paint it as something different, because I feel like they don't want it to turn into a consistent thing where artists can make demands of them and they have to respond.
But I think you guys are thinking about like artists as a whole, as opposed to artists that are under one umbrella, right? Like, it makes more sense to me that artists can't collectively come together and kind of negotiate higher royalty rates on Spotify, because there's a huge percentage of artists that are just fine with how Spotify is working.
I'm
right,
saying
but there's not
specifically UMG artists, though, knowing that UMG is getting the best rates at Spotify and sat down and helped set the rates. That's what I'm saying. I'm not even talking about all artists. I'm saying if specifically UMG artists recognize that banding together can push the buck forward, it puts UMG in a place that they're having to negotiate with artists consistently, or the collective artist of UMG. And I think that puts them at a disadvantage.
It would. I mean, but what could they do if there was like a single Slack group with all UMG artists and they started talking about, they would collectively have a lot of power if that was possible.
Careful, y'all. They gonna come for us after this.
if that was possible, if they all got in the same WhatsApp or the same Slack group and got on the same page, what could UMG do?
Well, wait a minute. What collective bargaining power would they have? Because it's not the same as, say, how a union would operate at, my dad used to drive bus. There was a union there, and there are, I believe, yearly negotiations. Whereas with the labels, when you're signed, you're signed. They own all your shit. So you can't really say, hey, my contract's about to be up in a couple months, let's talk. Because once your contract is up, you're either out or you're stuck forever, because a lot of artists don't get out of their contracts. So
there's options, Payne. There are a lot of options. You can be.
Well, I'm curious.
I don't necessarily want to suggest things. I don't want to be the person who's like, UMG artists need to band together and do this. But there's several things that you could do. I think even when it comes to promo, when it comes to turning in more masters, when it comes to, like, there's so many things that you can withhold. If you're talking about the upper echelon of artists that bring them the type of revenue that would move the buck forward for them to say, oh, we do need to consider this. There are plenty of things they could do. Even just talking about them negatively in a public light, like when you're going on the Jimmy Fallons and the late night shows and you're talking about things, when you're refusing to show up to things like these radio promo tours that make the label a lot of money and the artists don't get paid from it. You know, there's a lot of different things that there are opportunities for you to quote unquote boycott. I think artists are the best at pitching fits. I think artists are the best at hitting you where it hurts. So I can't even get my head in that full standpoint, but there's so many, like when an artist knows you want something, but they want something more, they can find any way to keep you from that thing. So I think that there's I think that you're a decent human being, so your mind doesn't get into that framework, but I think there's so many things that the artist could do. And I think that there's some really smart business decisions that could be made. I think of like Russell Wilson right now, all the stuff that he's been going through. There's a way that you can, even as a decent human being, withhold yourself and present yourself in a certain way that allows for people to notice, oh, there's something wrong with this. And if you have somebody setting an example, or you even have just a small conversation with a group of people that you know, you like, a lot of the UMG artists tour together, work together. I think there's a lot of things. I mean, management teams would also have to support it to a degree. So it would be some effort, but I think there's plenty of possibility to push back.
You're not locked into these deals forever. So there are artists that are almost out of their deal that they might want to continue working with. And there are artists that they want to sign to deals, right? If you're an artist and you're about to sign to UMG and they tell you, look, well, your music's not going to be on TikTok, and maybe you built your platform to this point on TikTok, you might pivot and be like, yo, that's ridiculous. I can't sign here because that's where my fan base is. That's where I've grown such an audience. So yeah, artists, they do have power. They just it's so segregated. I'm just saying it's not going to happen. Like there isn't going to be one single Slack group with hella, all of UMG's roster in there. But I just don't see, like, there's typically with other things, there's other sides to this. I don't see any artists that are like, yeah, take my shit off of TikTok. They weren't seeing that money anyway. There's no other side to this for the artist. Like it's just bad. So that's why I think there could be more rallying around this particular topic.
Well, I don't think an artist is indecent if they decide to fight the way they can fight if there's something that they believe in.